Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On-Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on-demand care for common ailments, such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho is a big state, and it covers a lot of territory. Idaho Matters wants to take you to every corner of the Gem State by visiting all 44 counties, and we need your help to do that. Email us your story ideas at idahomatters@boisestate.edu for our new series we're calling Idaho 44. And be sure to join us each weekday at noon and 8 on Idaho Matters and travel the state with us. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Cadet. This is Idaho Matters. Bryan Kohberger sat in a courtroom in Boise yesterday and watched as the family members of the 4 University of Idaho students he murdered spoke out about their loved ones.
I will call you what you are: sociopath, psychopath, murderer. I will ask the questions that reverberate violently in my own head, so loudly that I can't think straight most any day.
That was Olivia Gonsalves. She is the sister of one of the victims. Now, at the end of that 2-hour hearing, a judge sentenced Kohberger to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole in exchange for prosecutors dropping the death penalty. However, we still don't know why he did it. So here to tell us what happened yesterday and what happens now is Idaho Statesman investigative reporter Kevin Fixler. Kevin, nice to have you back on the show.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me, Gemma.
So, Kevin, before we start, can you give us just a quick synopsis of this case, which has gone on for more than 2 years now?
On November 13th, 2022, in the early morning hours, about 4 a.m., Bryan Kohberger, we now know definitively, entered the home of 5 University of Idaho students, 5 women, and proceeded to maniacally kill with a knife 4 of them, 3 of them, and then also one of their boyfriends, Ethan Chapin. It took investigators almost 7 weeks to break the case. He was a former Washington State University PhD student of criminology and criminal justice. He then drove his vehicle across the country and was visiting his family in eastern Pennsylvania. He grew up in the Poconos, and police then, in a raid on December 30th, 2022, arrested him. He was extradited back to the region and brought to Latah County Jail. He was arraigned in May of 2023 on 4 charges of first-degree murder. Prosecutors sought to seek the death penalty initially, and over the course of 2.5 years of legal proceedings, we reached a plea agreement between the 2 sides earlier this month, and his sentencing was yesterday.
So, Kevin, let's talk about what happened in the courtroom yesterday. There were quite a few family members there, as well as one of the 2 surviving victims. Can you kind of describe for us the atmosphere at the courthouse yesterday?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, it was filled with emotion, of course. Even outside, just waiting to get in, there was an anxiety, and it's this highly anticipated moment we've all sort of been watching and waiting for. Even though he had pleaded guilty earlier this month, it's a surreal experience. And I can tell you, as a reporter on this case for more than the 2.5 years, it's hard to fathom that we finally have reached the terminus in this case. And Bryan Kohberger very coldly stared and watched as family members and friends delivered just brutal words explaining what they thought of him, and had long wanted to speak in court and direct those words directly at him, and they finally had the chance. So just a kind of a miserable experience, to be honest with you, and highly charged, highly emotional. You just felt terrible for these families.
Yeah. As you mentioned during the hearing, there were numerous family members of the victims who were able to speak, and some read statements. And I think they ranged the gamut. They were tearful. There was anger. And I want to play Xana's stepfather, Randy Davis, and what he had to say.
You're going to go to hell. I know people believe in other stuff. You're evil. There's no place for you in heaven. You took our children. You are going to suffer, man. I'm shaking because I want to reach out to you, but I hope you feel my energy, okay? Go to hell.
And then Xana's sister, Jasmine Cornodal, who said the hearing wasn't about Kohberger.
It's about justice for Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie. It's about honoring the beautiful people they were and still are in God's eyes. On November 13th, 2022, a piece of my heart was ripped away. There's no way to ever fully describe the weight of losing my sister, my best friend. No sentence or punishment will ever come close to the justice Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie deserve.
So, Kevin, that's just a snippet of what some of the family members said. I will tell you, I was watching along with so many other people, and there were a couple of things that stood out to me in those statements. One was that, and I believe it was two people, mentioned Kohberger's own family and what they must be going through, and really how they have made them pariahs, right? The other, and we played this at the top, was Kaylee's sister, Olivia. Kevin, that statement felt like a masterclass in giving a victim impact statement. I'm curious what, and I know you were in the overflow room, but what was the feeling after Olivia gave that statement?
Well, as you said earlier, the emotions and the words across these three families, I mean, but essentially also representing the Chapins who were not there yesterday, but they ran the gamut. And Olivia Gonsalves, I know she had done an interview with Brian Enton of News Nation for about an hour and explained the difficulties, the challenges of developing one of these statements and trying to understand how you go about that. Do you deliver words directed at the person? Do you address the court? Do you speak on behalf of your loved one and describe all the things you really appreciated about them? And I think she found the bullseye for her and her family. And she used a lot of the words and even survey work that Bryan Kohberger had done as a master's student directly at him and used his own words against him. It was clearly she had studied, she had researched this, she had really wanted to just drive it home with him. And the audience, which was made up of largely media, aside from this group of family members across, again, primarily three families, there were also just members of the public, a lot of people who have followed this case closely, and people erupted in applause. And that was really surprising because you don't see that type of thing in court typically. And it was somewhat surprising that Judge Hippler allowed that to continue. And it happened more than once, but it was really an exclamation mark after Olivia's words. And that Judge Hippler didn't step in, I think, was him sending a message to Kohberger that you're not protected here anymore. And you can anticipate that in prison for the rest of your life.
So Kohberger had an opportunity to speak. Did he say anything at all? I mean, how did he look during this 2 hours of a hearing where, time and time again, family members, looked at him and told him their thoughts?
He, as he has done throughout the course of this case, he just stared directly, very vacant, absent any emotion, and took this tongue lashing, this beating, essentially. I spoke with former police chief in Moscow, James Fry, yesterday afterwards in an interview, and I'm going to quote him. He told me this: "The most non-emotional person I've ever seen, just cold, nothing." And that was really, I think, the experience that people had watching Kohberger in his orange, now prison jumpsuit, shackled, and he just sat back and a couple nods here and there, or observing the audience or looking to the judge, but he just sat and just took this. In terms of the opportunity to speak, Judge Hippler offered it, and Bryan Kohberger said, and I quote, "I respectfully decline." And that was it.
Yeah, Kevin, his mother and sister were in the courtroom as well yesterday. Um, and I think sometimes, we forget that people like Kohberger have families. They have loved ones. His sister and his mother had to sit through that. Did we see any type of reaction from them? Did we see Kohberger making any type of eye contact, anything like that, with his mom and his sister?
My coworker, Alex Brizzi, was in the courtroom and was able to watch and see Kohberger's mother and sister and how they responded. And when the family member, I believe it was Xana's uncle, spoke directly to how Kohberger had completely sullied his family's name and ruined their reputation, and that this was going to be a stain on them forever. Unfortunately, his mother nodded, and there were points, of course, where some of the harshest words at their son and brother, they too were crying and emotional, and it's similar to the sentencing hearing where I was in the courtroom and watched Kohberger's mother and father, and his father did not attend this hearing, which is interesting, but they just were just wrapped in emotion, and I think it was just still such a shock for them, even though they knew this was coming and flew out from Pennsylvania to, I guess, support their loved one to the best of their ability. But, it was an emotional day for everyone, Gemma.
Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, you could feel that just watching it. With that said, Kevin, after family members read statements in court, it was time for Judge Stephen Hippler to hand down Kohberger's sentence. And as he did so, he actually called Kohberger a coward.
Truth be told, I'm unable to come up with anything redeeming about Mr. Kohberger because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. His actions have made him the worst of the worst.
Judge Hippler then went on to say it was time for Kohberger's 15 minutes of fame to end.
By continuing to focus on why, we continue to give Mr. Kohberger relevance. We give him agency and we give him power. Yet even if I could force him to speak, which legally I cannot, how could anyone ever be assured that what he speaks is the truth?
Kevin, was there anything else that the judge said yesterday that stood out to you, or even his demeanor? I mean, you mentioned in our last segment how he allowed clapping after a few of these victim impact statements. And I have to say, I was quite surprised that he did allow that. So were there other things or anything he said that stood out to you?
Yeah, Gemma, as we both know, I think Judge Hippler is in full command of his courtroom, and he obviously allowed that to occur. I think what was also really surprising, not only did we see Prosecutor Bill Thompson once again emotional, but Judge Hippler was too. He was wiping away tears at points. He was using a Kleenex to dab at his nose, and you don't typically see that from a judge. I think it was just such an emotional day for everyone. This build after all this time, and though Judge Hippler has only been on the case since this past fall, as the case moved from Moscow to Boise, it clearly impacted him, and he really leaned into the fact that parents had been robbed of their children by this man. And Judge Hippler, a parent himself, I think that really struck a chord for him in his words to the community and on the national stage, his words to America and beyond. He had received maybe some pressure, you might argue, from President Trump, who posted on social media that in this plea deal, Bryan Kohberger was able to avoid the death penalty in terms of to receive these life sentences, but he didn't have to answer any questions about why he might have done this. And Judge Hippler addressed that in the comment that you played there, that it's perhaps best that we not even grant him the space or the consideration to ask him about that, because we're just granting him that authority and that control over the community going forward because we want him to answer this, but we didn't believe that he would ever say anything truthful anyway. The other thing that I would say that Judge Hippler really spoke to was that he noted that Bryan Kohberger has never shown an ounce of remorse, that it's not even clear that he recognizes the pain and the damage that he has done to these families, these communities, to the state of Idaho, and to really all of us. And again, that really struck a chord, I think, across the courtroom and anyone watching the live stream that this is a despicable person. And evil is a word that was thrown around quite a bit. And I think Judge Hippler really tried to express himself personally, in addition to laying the groundwork for the reasons behind his sentences.
Well, and I think you're so right, Kevin. As you mentioned, Judge Hippler is a parent himself, children around the same age as the victims. And I think any of us who are parents and we have children around that age, I think it strikes almost like an extra chord in you, because you think, could that have been my child? In particular, how many people have children at the University of Idaho? So as you said, it has impacted so many people in I think unexpected ways. So once Hippler said what he said, he then handed down the 4 consecutive life sentences plus 10 years. So was this the plea deal that had been agreed to?
Yes, it was. Judge Hippler handed down the maximum sentence possible. We know that Bryan Kohberger has no ability or no chance of parole and no ability to appeal. I know we'll get into that in a few moments perhaps, but Prosecutor Thompson, in a press conference afterwards, he wanted to ensure he characterized this not as a plea bargain. And I know we sort of used that phrasing equally for a deal or an agreement, but he wanted to really illustrate there was no bargain here. When the defense reached out to the prosecution, about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and said, we want to reach a deal, he said, this is what we offered them. He needs to plead guilty on all counts, which the 10 years is associated with felony burglary, in addition to the 4 individual first-degree murder charges. There would be no parole. There would be no ability to appeal. And there was no negotiation, was really what he wanted to point out. In exchange for dropping the death penalty, he will need to plead to all of these counts, and Bryan Kohberger agreed to do so.
So I want to talk really quickly about his ability to appeal or not appeal. So can Kohberger appeal? Because I asked this question, Kevin, because there's been some back and forth on this.
Yeah, Judge Hippler it was a gag order hearing last week. I think people were surprised to hear him say that, well, I know no appeal is part of the plea deal, but, in effect, that's not quite the case. Kohberger, like any prisoner, will have the ability to appeal, but because of the plea deal, essentially those won't be honored. It will have to be reviewed by appeals courts, whether that's the appellate court here in Idaho or the state Supreme Court, or perhaps even at the federal level. It would be reviewed, but based on the plea agreement, it precludes that ability, and under review, it seems pretty clear that would not move forward. Judge Hippler did also note yesterday, although it's kind of inconsequential, but if based on the plea agreement details, if Kohberger does appeal, it would actually potentially violate the plea agreement. What the recourse there is, I'm not exactly sure, but he did warn that were you to do that, that is a potential consequence.
You also heard from Latah County Prosecutor Bill Thompson. I'm curious about what he said, because, Kevin, he kind of apologized to some of the families who were initially upset with this plea deal.
Yeah, yesterday in a question and answer session following a press conference where many of the key figures who were investigators or involved in this case from the legal side, he understood that not all of the families, the Gonsalves family in particular, and actually Jeff Kernodle, the father of Xana, who also spoke yesterday during the hearing with an impact statement, they were not in favor of the plea agreement to avoid a trial where more information may have been learned publicly, and including for the families, and the potential consequence of a death penalty. He said he understood, And he shouldered that, and he knew that this was not what everyone wanted, despite the majority of families actually supporting the plea deal in the end. And he said, I understand, but this is my responsibility, and I needed to deliver the best outcome I could. I believe this was it. It won't make everyone happy, but I did what I believe was right. I made that call. He took that fully on himself, and even then was emotional, but said that he felt this was the right course.
So where is Kohberger currently, Kevin?
Impressively, he was transferred immediately to the Idaho Maximum Security Prison just south of Boise in Kuna. So they didn't waste any time. We weren't sure when he might be transferred from the Ada County Jail or the courthouse, I guess, yesterday, and end up behind bars where he'll live the rest of his life. But that did happen very expeditiously, and they must have been prepared. They obviously had a date circled on the calendar, and he is now there.
So I'm curious if there's anything next in this case, Kevin. I mean, is it truly over? And I ask because you did quote an Idaho State Police lieutenant in a story that you recently wrote who said, we may never know why he did this.
Again, we know, I mean, we probably won't unless Bryan Kohberger chooses to speak. But in terms of what could happen next, I actually just released a story. I spoke with Josh Hurwitz, the former U.S. Attorney of Idaho, who ended up as a prosecutor on this case after he transitioned out of that position. And I also spoke with a former federal defender out of Atlanta who speaks to these kind of issues. And there is really the chance that there could be a federal case brought. Even though it's unlikely, that would be a potential new pathway to exploring the death penalty, which the Gonsalves family had encouraged their supporters to contact the Department of Justice, which oversees the U.S. Attorney's offices and brings federal charges, to contact them and encourage them to say they still want the death penalty. So you do need to find what's called a federal hook, a reason to grant the feds jurisdiction. It would cost a lot of money and again, be a bit of a surprise if they chose to do that. We're not clear if there is a federal jurisdiction here, but that is a potential pathway to what could happen. Beyond that, and that could take some time or to proliferate, we have reached the end of this case. There are new records that have been released. The Moscow Police Department posted thousands of records yesterday. Their reports, and there's some pretty shocking stuff included in that we're still going through, including the violence that occurred at the home and what Bryan Kohberger really did. So we're still moving through some of that, but beyond the legal portion of this, we really are, as I said at the top, we really are at the terminus of this after nearly 3 years.
Yeah. Well, Kevin, I appreciate you coming on the show. I know really all of the time that you have spent on this case, and frankly, the emotional drain that it takes on everyone. It is just sad, and hopefully, people can find their way forward. We've been speaking with Kevin Fixler, investigative reporter with the Idaho Statesman, about the sentencing of quadruple murderer Bryan Kohberger. Be sure to read all of Kevin's reporting on this. He has truly done an excellent job. And that'll do it for this episode of Idaho Matters. Thanks so much for listening. And just a reminder, you can find all of our episodes wherever you get your podcasts.
These days, there's so much news, it can be hard to keep up with what it all means for you, your family, and your community. The Consider This podcast from NPR features our award-winning journalism. 6 days a week, we bring you a deep dive on a news story and provide the context and analysis that helps you make sense of the news. We get behind the headlines. We get to the truth. Listen to the Consider This podcast from NPR.